In the 1950s, China wasn't the nuclear superpower we know today. It was a nation clawing its way back from decades of war, led by a man with grand ambitions, Mao Zedong. But here's something surprising. At first, Mao didn't even fully understand the destructive power of nuclear weapons. He once dismissed them as nothing more than a paper tiger, a mere scare tactic, useless in real combat. He believed that nuclear weapons couldn't break the will of the people, and that the West was bluffing. But Mao would soon realize just how wrong he was. In the wake of World War II, the United States had become the ultimate nuclear power. They weren't bluffing, and as Cold War tensions soared, America tightened its grip on the Pacific. Taiwan, just miles from the Chinese coast, became a critical flashpoint. American warships patrolled the seas, and U.S. nuclear weapons became a constant, looming threat, especially for Mao's China. The U.S. made one thing clear: Taiwan was off-limits to Beijing, and any attempt to reclaim it would be met with devastating force. It was in this atmosphere of tension and fear that Mao had a change of heart. He realized that without nuclear weapons, China would always be vulnerable, always living in the shadow of American might. This was the beginning of China's nuclear journey, not out of a desire for conquest, but out of survival. Mao's shift in thinking led to one of the boldest decisions in Chinese history. But how would a country still recovering from war build a bomb capable of shifting the global balance of power? With the realization that China needed nuclear weapons to survive in a world dominated by US and Soviet power, Mao Zedong made a decision that shocked even some of his closest advisors. In 1955, China launched its secret nuclear weapons program. The goal? To build the atomic bomb and do it fast. But China had two major problems. They lacked the technical know-how and the resources. After all, the country was still recovering from war and famine. It was a monumental task, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. While the US and Soviet Union had spent decades developing their nuclear arsenals, China was starting from scratch. They needed help. And here's where things get really interesting. Despite their rivalry with the Soviet Union, Mao turned to the Soviets for assistance. The Soviet Union, wary of American dominance in Asia, saw an opportunity to gain influence. They agreed to provide China with technical support and scientific knowledge. But there was a catch. This wasn't a friendship. It was a calculated move. The Soviets weren't going to hand over all their nuclear secrets. Mao and his team still had to figure out much of it on their own. Chinese scientists worked day and night, struggling against the odds. Mistakes were made and resources were stretched thin. Some even questioned whether China had the capability to succeed. But Mao was undeterred. He pushed forward, knowing that the world was watching. And that brings us to one of the most dramatic moments in this story, the final showdown that would prove China's place on the global stage. It all led to one date, October 16, 1964. In the remote deserts of Xinjiang, China was about to make history. After years of determination, secrecy, and scientific breakthroughs, the moment had arrived. China's first atomic bomb was seconds away from detonation. The explosion was felt around the world. China had successfully tested its first atomic bomb, joining the ranks of the elite nuclear powers. It was a triumph not just for Chinese science, but for Mao Zedong's leadership. The world could no longer ignore China as a major power. But here's the key point. If it hadn't been for the constant threat posed by the United States, China might never have pursued the bomb. The fear factor America created, with its nuclear-armed fleets circling Taiwan and its dominance over the Pacific, forced China to act. Mao Zedong, who had once mocked nuclear weapons as paper tigers, now understood their true power, both in physical destruction and as symbols of geopolitical influence. Without that looming American threat, China's nuclear ambitions might have remained a distant dream. The US never intended for China to become a nuclear power. In fact, it did everything it could to prevent it. But ironically, the more the US flexed its nuclear muscle in the region, the more determined China became to develop its own arsenal. Washington's strategy backfired. And now, in 2024, we're seeing the long-term consequences of that decision. China's nuclear arsenal has grown into one of the largest and most sophisticated in the world. The fear factor that once drove China to develop nuclear weapons now shapes the tense relationship between China and Taiwan. Today, Beijing uses its nuclear arsenal as a strategic deterrent, making any potential conflict over Taiwan a global powder keg. The fear that once pushed China into the nuclear arms race now shapes one of the most dangerous flashpoints in modern geopolitics. The question is, how will this story end? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching!